Thanks to everybody who's joined us. And I want to congratulate and thank Murray House for this initiative and for giving us a chance to spotlight Costello House Walker Terrace, where we grew up. Most of us grew up, and to spotlight the life. The first of all, I say Costello House. It's very interesting. It's a Costello House. It was a housing scheme, but for some reason we always went as Costello House, not as Costello Housing Scheme. So, for example, I lived at 71 Costello House. Somebody else might live at 21 Costello House. It was very unusual in that sense. Now, let me first of all say where Costello House is. Costello and Walker Terrace. I have to say this because to this day, when I tell people I come from Costello House, it's amazing how many people don't know where that is, and I have to then explain where it is. Costello House is just a little scheme to the south of the Le Repentir burial ground. So when you go through the St. John Road, you come to, you go through the burial ground, you come to Sussex Street, and as soon as you pass Sussex Street, that little group of houses with is Costello House, Costello Housing Scheme, and then you have Walker Terrace, are a set of terraces to the north of Costello House on the sides of the housing development. So, but it was one area. Maybe we were one group. We interacted as one neighborhood. Costello House was established somewhere in the early 1950s. And so it was definitely one of the earliest housing developments in the country. And subsequently, of course, you get the Rumvelts and large housing scheme and so on, the penitents. I think of it as a kind of a boutique housing development because it was small. It was, just about 100 houses. And it was a kind of model, I think, for what was to come later on. Although, the other houses kind of departed from that model. Now, what I hope that we can achieve by this is not only an opportunity to spotlight and to be nostalgic a little bit about the area, but also I think it's useful to pay attention to our experience as a country in public housing. Let's see what lessons there are from this discussion of value as far as public housing is concerned. The other thing is a little bit as a reflection of what has happened to the country. As you'll notice, all of the panelists except myself do not live in Guyana anymore. So, what you see happening in Costello is what has happened to the country. The issue of our high hopes in the 1960s and 1970s, how things kind of collapsed, the infrastructure collapse and so on. And eventually, out-migration, et cetera, et cetera. The whole set of experiences of the country are played out in this. So I hope that by shedding light on these things, we can, do something of value, not just to ourselves, but to the kind of national discourse. All of the panelists are from former residents of the area. Unfortunately, we don't have any current residents on the panel, and that's a perspective that I regret that we don't have. I really would have been happy to have that, but hopefully, maybe in the discussion, some of that will come up. So with that, let me invite Marilyn to speak. Marilyn Thijs is a former resident. Prior to leaving Guyana in 1977, she worked as a former Assistant Confidential Secretary to the Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister. She has been a member of the National Women's Hockey team, field hockey team, for many years. She currently lives in Toronto. She's a graduate of the York University in Public Administration and Justice Studies, and as well, also in Information Technology. And she worked as an IT business systems analyst prior to retirement. So with that, let me turn it straight over to you, Marilyn.
Okay, Desmond, thank you. Before I start my presentation, I would like to just quickly acknowledge and thank all the members of the Costello Walker Terrace WhatsApp group chat for their contribution to the material in this presentation today. The idea of sketching the physical location of the neighborhood stems from the fact that we wanted to paint a picture of the memories we held of our childhood days in the community, as each house number or unit number has their own yet congruent story to tell of children growing up in the neighborhood. As Desmond alluded to earlier, the major streets that surrounded the Costello Walker Terrace community were the Vicinjon Road, as he said, starting through the burial ground, both north and south sides of Vicinjon Road, Savage Street, Freeman Street, and the Costello Street. Other major landmarks were the Princess Street, La Rapintiere Cemetery, as he mentioned, the Sussex Street Trench, and all the way over to the right, a trench we called Barbados Trench. We don't know how it got that name, but that's what we called it. That trench ran all the way along Ling Avenue. And there were surrounding, by the time I grew up there in 1955, I was born there in 1955, we had the Northeast La Penitence and East La Penitence housing schemes, as well as Ling Avenue housing scheme and the West Rumfeld housing scheme around us. The St. Pius Church was the main church for the Roman Catholic individuals living in the area. With respect to some schooling, apart from some privately owned and run kindergarten schools that ran right out of the houses, the St. Pius RC School was also the main school for individuals in the neighborhood. As you can see on that diagram, the Costello houses are pictured in little white squares with the numbers on it. Okay, 1 to 101. And the Walker Terrace, I highlighted in blue, just on my left-hand side here, and running along on the right, just along the Puntrench Dam. The Costello houses, actually, they were single detached two-storied homes, which had 3 bedrooms on the upper level. And the Walker Terrace units it was also a 2-story, but had 2 bedrooms on the upper level. Both the Costello houses and the Walker Terrace units were wooden structures, individually fenced, with septic tanks and running water in each home. There was ample front and backyard space, sufficient for a car, a flower bed at the front, and a vegetable garden at the back. There were also lots of fruit trees in most yards. As on the screen, I kind of highlighted in yellow a little bit. The spaces between the Walker Terrace homes were used as play fields for the kids of the neighborhood. The Puntrench that's highlighted in orange in the middle of practically the neighborhood was the transportation medium for sugarcane and molasses to and from the sugar estates such as Ogle, Diamond, and Enmore, and sometimes also transported loads of bucks and spice mangoes. There were 2 caravans in the immediate community. I highlighted in yellow to my left was the Hacks, and then somewhat to the south, Muds, referred to as Muds, Mrs. Belgrave Caravan. These 2 caravans functioned as our modern day convenience stores. There were also 2 other bottom house, as we call it, grocery stores, the Hardats and the Sukraj, that serviced our area as well as all the surrounding areas. And much later on, around the East La Penitence area, at the top of my screen here, were a number, two grocery stores, if I can remember, that also serviced the neighborhood. Okay, so that is basically what I have on, the location and the layout of the place as it was. I will just quickly run through a number of pictures that I was able to collect from everyone involved. This is our well-known St. Pius Roman Catholic Church. Everyone knows where that is, ran along Freeman Street. And this is one of the original Costello houses. This was a picture from 1982 of what the original Costello houses looked like. This is a backside view. I tried to get the backside view of the Costello house behind the kids there. And it's basically the same as it was. Over the years, there's been a lot of changes in the building structures, etc. And the following pictures are going to just give you an idea what some of the houses look like in the community today. Recently, the Independence Boulevard was renamed and officially renamed. This was the plaque that was put down. This Independence Boulevard, as I said, was originally the Puntrench that we knew. I tried to get a picture of the Walker Terrace that runs along the now Independence Boulevard. This is just one picture I was able to get recently. And this is the second. This runs along some of the Walker Terraces that runs along Savage Street. And also on Savage Street, more from the Vicinjon Road side. These are some of the reconstruction of some of the Costello houses that we saw, you know, from earlier. It has some of the look, but you can see the expansion. This is another of it. And these are Costello houses that have been totally rebuilt on some of the existing plots in the neighborhood. If you see to the extreme left of the picture here, that is an original Costello house just with some modifications. But this is what has been rebuilt on the house, on the lot right next to it. This is also another beautiful home in the neighborhood. And another, and another. So that was my contribution to the physical location of the Costello Walker Terrace community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that brief but very graphic outline. I think that's a perfect place to start. I'm sure there are lots of interesting questions that are going to come up. I'll go straight into the presentation by Paula. You know, how did people acquire the houses? You know, that's obviously a question we would want to address. So Paula is a former United Nations Senior Accounts Specialist with over 25 years of service working with the United Nations, based in a number of different countries, mostly in East Africa. She's now retired and working as an independent consultant and lives in Orlando, Florida. So with that, Paula, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Thomas. Can you hear me? So this is just a brief insight of the financing of the Costello House Walker Terrace housing. This housing development was an affordable housing development established by the Department of Housing and Planning in 1955, almost 70 years ago. Most of the people who bought these homes were government employees, educators, and some of them were self-employed. The buying price at that time in 1955 was $4,500 with a 10% deposit, which was $450. Therefore, the eligibility for the potential homeowner was not based on income, and neither was there a mortgage owed to a bank or a finance company. What existed at that time was an agreement between the Department of Housing and Planning and the potential home buyer, called a rental purchase agreement, which in today's terminology would be called a rent-to-own terminology. The monthly payments were made to the Department of Housing and Planning with a minimum payment of $20 per month or more until the home was paid off in full. The home buyer would then receive the title or transport for the home at that time. During that time, 1955, the records kept by the home owners' payments were kept on ledger account, not the computerized accounting that we have today. 70 years ago, the cost of living, the prices of goods and services were much lower than they are today. With inflation, prices rise. The price of these homes would be much more costly in today's market. I would like to add something else. These homes were like just walk-in, move-in ready homes. And so these homes were built to a specific dimension. The yard space were equal and front and back. And the land area was equal. And that's my presentation, just short and brief. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you very much. And you know, there's a lot of detailed information there. that we can chew on. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. So we move on to Roxanne Armstrong. Roxanne resides in Barbados, where she has followed a career in media, in the press, with the Nation newspaper. She was actually the first female editor of the nation's flagship paper, the Sunday Sun, and eventually became its first executive editor until her retirement. Roxanne is remembered by her childhood friends as an avid cricket lover and cricketer. So it was perhaps in her destiny to be married eventually to a cricketer and the businessman, the late Royal Brancker, whom most of you would remember actually played for the West Indies team back in the day. So with that, I invite Roxanne to tell us a little bit. So what we're trying to do is present here Costello House Walker Terrace as a physical place and also as a spirit, as a community. So it's over to Roxanne to address the community spirit and diversity aspects. Roxanne?
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, and good morning to all. So nice to see some familiar faces. I was born in 1954, and in 1955, my family moved from First Street in Albertown into the Costello housing scheme. And yes, when I moved in, I could barely walk, but Costello soon became my playground where I played, well, mostly cricket, and hung out with my Costello family. Costello and Walker Terrace, which were the apartments kind of adjacent to the Costello houses, showcased a vibrant tapestry of diversity and community spirit. The two communities were new, and the residents of Walker Terrace and Costello were all transplanted from somewhere else. And so they had to make and shape a whole new community. And that we certainly did. Guyana is called, as we know, the land of six races, among other things. And in Costello, we had them all the races. The residents hailed from various cultural backgrounds, including Indo-Guyanese, Afro-Guyanese, Portuguese, Chinese, Amerindian, Douglas. All of them were there. Some of the names that come to mind that surrounded where I live were the Bournes, the Cadugans, the Wongs, the Yaws, the Thomases, the Philadelphias, the Beckles, the Drakes, two sets of Drakes, the Keelans, the Dyers, the Fanfares, the Frasers, the Mars, and I could go on. The neighborhood was truly a melting pot of traditions and customs. Checkers, for example, when we were celebrating Pagua, we were either taking part in throwing colors at each other, or some of us just looking through the window at the others running up and down, screaming and having fun. But in addition to the special holidays and colorful celebrations, one can experience the richness of this diversity in everyday interactions. From the lively conversation down the pathways. In those days, we used to call it the pathway, but now they would probably call it the cul-de-sac. From the lively conversation down the pathways, the games we played, the fights we got into. Yes, we got into some fights, at least I did. The film shows in Uncle Ken's yard. And that's also where many of the cricket matches took place. Flying kites at Easter, or the exchange of children from house to house, Doors were always open for the children in the area to wander in and out. For example, when my parents went out, we were deposited either by the Cadugans or the Dyers or the Yaws until they came back. And let's not forget also the sense of entrepreneurship which prevailed in each household. For example, one could buy a fruity for 1 cent from the Bournes. And for those who don't know remember what a fruity is, it's something like a snow cone now, but it was like in squares that you used to buy and suck, or you could buy downs from the Yaws, mangoes and other fruit from the Vogesons. Mr. Drake's was a tailor. Mrs. Dyer was a seamstress. My mother iced cakes for birthdays and weddings and other events. And at Easter time, one of the things we looked forward to was hot cross buns from Mrs. Drake's. Paula, you might remember this. She made these hot cross buns from scratch. I've never had hot cross buns like this again. And she sent to every household. Her sons, Jerry and Colin, were the delivery boys.
Yeah.
I always personally look forward to when Jerry delivered ours. Everyone took pride in their heritage, while at the same time fostering a sense of unity and inclusivity within the neighborhood. Neighbors came together to support one another in times of need. One example I remember in 62, 63, when they had the 80-day strike and there was lots of rioting, Indians beating blacks, beating Indians, etc. My father was stranded in the interior for weeks, leaving my mother alone at home with the kids. And one night we received a threatening phone call. "Tonight is your night. We're coming for you tonight," said the voice on the other end. And I think, well, we think what happened was that they had mixed up our house and phone number with my uncle, Percy, who was in politics at the time. He was my father's brother. It was very scary for us, but my brother immediately left the house and later returned with boys from the neighborhood armed with sticks and stones. Those boys formed a vigilante group that night and watched over our house the entire night. But it didn't end there. The group became a Costello neighborhood watch, which patrolled the neighborhood every night until the strike was over and the rioting had ceased. Whether it was organizing events, volunteering for local causes, or simply lending a helping hand, the residents of Costello demonstrated a strong sense of solidarity and camaraderie. Furthermore, the community promoted tolerance, understanding, and mutual respect among the members, fostering a very welcoming environment where everyone felt valued and accepted. We had school teachers, headmasters, nurses, police officers, housekeepers, and of course we had housewives. This inclusive list not only strengthened social bonds, but also contributed to the overall well-being and cohesiveness of the neighborhood. I can go on about all the friendships that were formed back in those days, some of them which are still flourishing to this day. But I'll have to leave that for another time. I know that my time is soon up. But that is a whole different story because there's still friendships coming out of Costello House where we still keep in touch and get together sometimes. In essence, Guyana as a country can take a leaf out of the book of Costello Housing Scheme and Walker Terrace. These two areas exemplified how diversity, when embraced and celebrated, can enrich the fabric of a community and foster a sense of belonging and unity among people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roxanne. You've made Costello sound like a really like the place to grow up. Definitely. The perfect place. We know life isn't always perfect, but thank you for that outline. So So Curtis Fraser is going to speak on the subject of the recreational aspects, the entrepreneurial aspects of the community. And Curtis is, well, Curtis used to be my neighbor, exactly, next door neighbor. Now retired and residing in the US as well. Former secretary of the Teaching Service Commission in Guyana. And he has retired following work after a career as leading payroll clerk at Brookdale University Hospital and Medical Center in Brooklyn, USA. So with that, it's over to you, Curtis.
Recreational and educational facilities and activities in the CWT community. Recreation played a vital role in the improvement of the quality of life in the CWT community. In fact, the community bond was strengthened by the early interactions of the children in the neighborhood through the various indoor and outdoor games and activities such as fishing, catching crab, and kite making. This led to the formation of lifelong friendships. The Bourne's residence at Lot 92 Costello House was one of the liming spots for many of the youths in the neighborhood. They were a very welcoming family, and their door was always open. The older boys hung out on the septic tank at the Becker's residence, Lot 82 Costello House. But the Duncan's yard at 45 Costello House was their venue for weightlifting. From time to time, small groups would go to the forested area, commonly called Back Dam, to pick fruits, trap birds, and collect sugarcane from the fields located across the Lamaha Canal. The popular games played were cricket and football. Some families set up mini table tennis tables in their yards. Several games were played in yards and on the streets and roads because the two small playgrounds in between the Walker Terrace houses were inadequate. Competitive matches were later played on the St. Pius Playground located on Fremont Street. Mr. Mackenzie, known as Mr. Mac, founded the first cricket team named the Independence Boulevard Cricket Club. The clubhouse was the Mackenzie's residence at Lot 7, Walker Terrace. Mr. Mack arranged cricket matches with the teams in the neighborhood schemes, as well as teams on the East Coast and West Demerara. Mr. Lawrence of Lot 16, Walker Terrace, later founded the Essex Cricket Club, which participated in third-class cricket. At least once a month, families in the CWT community gathered at Lot 40 Castle House to see film shows. Mr. Kenneth Joseph, respectfully known as Uncle Ken, had outdoor film shows for free. Some of us sat on the palings or on the grass and watched the shows on an improvised screen placed on the back of his house. The audiences were from the neighborhood as well as other schemes and nearby villages. Uncle Ken himself played cricket for Booker Sports Club cricket team. He was always available to give advice to budding cricketers in the area, even umpired a few matches. With respect to early education, St. Pius RC School was the only primary school in the neighborhood. However, parents were able to send smaller children to privately owned kindergarten schools headed by teacher Hannah and Mrs. Lane, Gill, and Jonas. Undoubtedly, each of them provided the building blocks of physical, social, and emotional development. Also, the basics of language, literacy, thinking, and cognitive skills, all of which were needed for further academic pursuits. Mr. Chung of Lot 18 Costello House was instrumental in acquiring funding for the development of the kindergarten schools headed by teachers Hannah and Lane. Also the steel band program for St. Pius School. Mr. Pyle of Lot 40 Walker Terrace had also opened a shorthand and typing school in the area. Entrepreneurial activities in Costello House Walker Terrace community. In the early days, two bottom house shops owned by the Sucrages and Hardat, called Fourth Shop and Second Shop, sold small groceries, green vegetables, and cow's milk to residents of the community. However, not long afterwards, a shop owned by Mr. Thormond of 55 Walker Terrace and two caravan shops owned by Ms. Belgrave and Mr. Hack emerged. The Mars family of Lot 42 Costello House reared poultry and sold chickens and eggs. Mr. Mars, popularly known as Papa, played his jukebox at several functions held in the neighborhood. The Keelans and Board sold fluty and ice blocks. Some of you may remember evangelist Sister Bacchus, who sometimes rode through the area preaching the gospel while selling ice blocks also. Aunt Irene of 38 Costello House always made certain that people in the neighborhood tasted her delicious pine tarts and cheese rolls before she rolled out her cart full of pastries for sales to customers in the city. Miss Eileen of Lot 53 Walker Terrace was well known for her black pudding. You had to place orders very early. Mr. Drakes of 80 Costello House, Cyril Bob, 65 Costello House, Mr. Lawrence of 16 Walker Terrace, and Norman Duncan of 45 Costello House were the tailors in the neighborhood. Keith Taylor of Lot 68 Costello House designed and sewed our shirts. Lloyd Lawrence of 16 Walker Terrace, fashion designer and dressmaker, prepared models for national and international beauty pageants. Ms. Joan Philadelphia was noted for her hairdressing and the promotion of Stanley products in the area. George Dawson of Lot 50 Walker Terrace, known as Red George, was a community thinker. He specialized in the making of a variety of plant pots, wire baskets, and tin containers. All were on display for sale. Most women in the neighborhood will remember Mr. John of Lot 49 Costello House, because whenever they had problems with their shoes, he came to their rescue. He made and repaired shoes. He was like the neighborhood cobbler. The Johns also reared ducks and geese. Mr. Bourne of Lot 92 Costello House assembled, sold, and repaired bicycles. That was my recollection of the recreational, educational, and entrepreneurial activities in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. Let me tell you, you have a huge store of information there. You know, one of the things I've learned from being in this group is I'm learning stuff about the neighborhood. But thank you very much. So we just move on very quickly. We run out of time. Vibert La Rose, who is a bishop with the Wild Wisdom Harvest International Church in the U.S., serving 5 continents, but it's kind of international in the way in the approach. And he also is based in the United States. So Vibert is going to talk to the kind of the sports personalities who came out of Costello. Over to you, Vibert.
Thank you and good day to all. It's a privilege to be here on this broadcast. my heart is strangely warmed because I remember Roxanne and the way how you know, Paula mentioned how the houses were acquired, and you know, I never knew that. So it's very informative. It's a privilege for me to be here, and thank you, Desmond, for putting together these beautiful people and with memories, and all who are maybe visitors or people who are looking in to us, because we all have this shared experience of living in the Costello houses, and it's rich. The rich shared experience. And like I said, I'm really a little emotional. Remember where I was born in Costello, the 3rd of July, 1955. Right, so I guess I was maybe in the top 5 first children, you know, born there. But again, I'm going to cover today the national contributions in terms of professional and sports personalities. Here we go. The CWT community was full of interesting people, each with his or her own story to tell, on each with a lesson. Even though I never met some of these people personally, I always felt proud when I read and heard of their professional or sports accomplishments, because he or she was a product of the community. Well, some national contributions of professionals is Mr. Charles Cadogan, Sr., was Sergeant at Arms, Mace Vera of Guyana National Assembly for many years. Some of us might know him or not, or the family. Again, Mr. Henry held the position of chief compounder, Booker's Drugstore. Dr. Desiree Dyer Christie, curriculum coordinator for mathematics and science in the Cayman Islands. Ms. Sybil Fraser, matron at Mackenzie Hospital, a member of the board of directors of the brass aluminum and cast iron foundry. Okay, now for the educators and teachers. Miss Henry, Jonas, Lane, Moore, Morris, Philadelphia. These were some of the people that our parents had, as it were, lent us to them to in our formative years, so that we could be what we are today. Then we have Beverly Drakes, this Paula's sister, pilot, GDF, and GAC in Guyana. USA, she's USA Senior Aviation Accident Investigator, Analyst, National Transportation Board. Then we have Curtis Fraser, who's with us here, Secretary of the Guyana Teaching Service Commission. Peter Pompey, General Manager, Brass, Aluminum, and Cast Iron Foundry. We have Robert Beckles, right, who is a pastor, understand, in the USA. They had the privilege to meet him over here. And then yours truly, myself, Vibert La Rose, as Desmond mentioned, Bishop. I was like 4 or 5 years in Costello houses, and my hobby was playing with sticks and talking to sticks and having the sticks talk back one to the other. I didn't realize that was the preach in me. That was my calling right there. But I straight away used to go Anglican school with my mom, St. Sidwell's and so on. I straight away. And I was very mischievous in Costello houses. I can remember Paula you know, you always remember kindness. And this young lady here was always kind to me. When folks see me, you know, it's like they don't want me around because I was mischievous and fighting and all of that. But Paula was always kind. So thank you, Paula. I remember that kindness.
You're
Really,
welcome.
yes. Sandy Taylor, right, who's a politician, USC, Councilwoman at Large, Irvington, New Jersey. We have Ronnie Moore, Chief Director of Prisons. He used to live in my street. We live in 22 Costello houses. Mr. Daniel Tom, right, he was in my street also. The Toms, 22 Costello House in that little street there. Captain, Transport and Harbor Department. Miss Joan Mason, Miss Guyana, pageant contestant. Joan Mason, many of you might remember her. And then we have Miss Thomas, that's Desmond's mom, right? She was a teacher, right? And then his father used to wear, I thought he was a captain growing up because he used to have on that kind of marine, kind of maritime or what have you, kind of clothing. And then we have Duncan. But for the sports, let me get through quickly. I hope my time is not gone. For the sports for personality, I want to remember my late brother, Lawrence La Rose, right? He died, succumbed to cancer last year, and he's now deceased. But he was my favorite brother and role model. He was a boxer in the GDF champion around the light heavyweight and so on. And also he was a marksman in the police force before he went to the military. So a street over from us was Vibert Stevenson, British Guiana welterweight boxing champion, right? Used to live this way we learned to box, myself and Lawrence, because he took us on his wings. Vibert Stevenson. Then we have Ronald Ferguson, and my cousin, also a boxer in Guyana, right? Guyana national welterweight boxing champion and boxing coach of Guyana Defense Force. That is, we used to call it MICE. All right. Teacher Mackenzie was a national boxer. So many of you remember him. Teacher Mackenzie, big family of the Mackenzies. Compton Devonish, Guyana national bicycle race champion. John Thijs, one of Guyana's top motor race champions. You probably remember these people. Veronica Wendt, she was national track and field champion. Remember her, right? Also, while still attending Central High School. Also, Patsy Gaskin was a field hockey player too. Attending Central, that is, went. Veronica held the record of fastest 400 runner for many years until it was broken in mid-1970. She was also a member of Guyana national women's hockey team. Right, then we have Anita Devonish, the Jules business owner, and member of Guyana national women's field hockey team. Marilyn, Thijs, mom, member of Guyana national women's field hockey team. Stobie Byrne, member of Guyana national men's hockey field team. Basketball, Mr. Cint Hill, that lives right in front of us on the ranges. I think over from Paula Drake's and their houses, their Cint Hill. Member of the Guyana national hockey's men team. That was, who's this one? Yet Cint Hill. Mark Holder of number 3 Walker Terrace was a renowned singer. So I trust that some of you remember these people. But my heart is strangely warm to grow up in a place, and you know, your formative years really is the foundational, like from reading from I learned to read from 1 to 10, and then you use those numbers for the rest of your life. So this is really a pleasure. Thank you again, Desmond, and God bless you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Vibert. I recognize that you could go on and on. There's so many important personalities to mention. I'll just mention one that you overlooked, Valda Lawrence, who was a recent minister of government and so on, who was a Walker Terrace girl, as far as I can remember. And her husband, too, is from Walker Terrace. So, but there are so many other people, Tyrone Ferguson, who used to be head of the presidential secretariat, and so on. We can go on and on. So really, I know it was difficult to really combine all that into a few minutes. You know, when I think of the houses, one of the things that strikes me, of course, the whole house was a wooden house. And very quickly, everybody who moved into the house modified the houses. But it was interesting that one of the interesting little things about those houses is, since they were wooden houses, they came with a trap door and a ladder, just in case there was a fire. And my mother, since my father was a seaman, my mother was alone with us most of the time. My mother had my father nail down the trap door and remove the ladder. But I mentioned that as there were lots of things, and we could talk about this a lot. There were lots of things that reflected a certain thoughtfulness about the house that they were making available to the public. And I worry that I don't see that as much with the current efforts at public housing. I mentioned that the ladder, but also the yard, as Marilyn mentioned, and so on. There were features that seem to be overlooked in current public housing approaches. And there are a few other things I could talk about, but I'll just leave it there. The fact, just to mention one thing, I really think that good housing was a way to foster population growth, if you want, because when I was growing up, all of the families were like 6 or 7, 8, 9 kids. And I suspect, you know, having a nurturing, comfortable home played a part in that. So we could talk about a whole lot of things.